mentioned there, big picture, what's serving me, what's not. We've also spoken about, tuning into and connecting with the why, a more meaningful and emotionally driven why for you about a particular habit. How then, how then do habits get kind of locked in or maybe hardwired for us?
I suppose the first thing is to think about what's actually happening with our habits. So first of all, our brain wants to work in habits. A lot of what we do, it's subconscious behavior. We're not necessarily consciously doing it. And one of the reasons the brain is doing that is to conserve energy. So if something is habitual, brain doesn't necessarily have to think, it just happens. So in some of the books that we've chatted about before and a lot of the research, they'll talk about that a behavior can be broken down into a cue, a craving, a response, and then we get a reward. So the cue, a cue might be, I'm on my way to work and I know I'm going to pass a certain coffee shop. And before I get to that, there might be a cue, I'm going to get myself a cup of coffee. Instantaneously, that might generate a craving for, God, I'd love to have a coffee. My response might be, I go in and buy the coffee, and the reward might be, that tastes nice, or it makes me feel whatever way people think it makes them feel, which is interesting because coffee doesn't really hit your system for probably 45 to 60 minutes after you actually consume it. So sometimes when it's like, oh God, I feel great, it's actually a placebo because it's not actually in your system. But that aside, so if you think about how it actually happens, for all of what I mentioned previously around listing down your habits, you could then actually go, right, what's the cue, what's the craving, what's the response, and what's the reward? And the piece I add onto that then is the reward really a reward? So sometimes it could be, it could be emotional eating, and it could be comfort eating, and all that, the reward might be, I feel good, but actually that's in the moment. I actually don't really feel good beyond it. So I think if you get into look at building out habits, maybe just to look at a couple of things. First of all, is I pay attention to what I call your micro environment. So these are the things that are in your immediate environment that you influence. So things like your setup in your house, things like, it's a very simple example of this might be, the things that you read, the things that you surround yourself with, the people you surround yourself with, the programs you decide to watch on TV, what you listen to, what you eat, what's in your house. A really simple example of this, of a micro environment, would be if you think about an alarm clock, and lots of people will use their phones as an alarm clock. So part of your micro environment could be, well, my phone is plugged in my bedroom and it's my alarm clock. But one of the things that might trigger is that when the alarm goes off and you turn it off in the morning, because you now have your phone in your hand, part of what you might do is you start scrolling or you start reading online, which isn't necessarily the most productive way to set your mind and set your energy for the day. So a simple example of an environmental tweak there might be, right, there's no phones in the bedroom, and guess what? I'm going to go down to a hardware shop and get an old school alarm for a tenner, and that's that done. So it's just thinking about how the environment that you have around you influences how you actually carry out and behave a lot of and actually do a lot of your habits. The second thing then would be, so just because you can get sometimes some easy wins from that. A second thing I'd then go to is, if you've got clarity on the habits that you want to change, is consider habit stacking them. So very simply, that just means you take a habit that's there right now that happens, and you try and stack or you incorporate your habit on top of it. So again, a simple example might be if somebody was trying to have a little bit more perspective in life and not maybe get as wound up and get as stressed or worried. One thing that helps that, and we know that helps this, is having a sense of gratitude for what you have in life. And a way of cultivating that is very simply to gratitude every day, whether that's verbally, whether that's writing down. So let's say if that's something simply that somebody wants to incorporate more into their life. Very simple way of doing it is say, right, I'm going to stack this new habit on top of something I know happens every day. So that could be, as an example, I know I'm going to sit down at my desk every day. So to habit stack this, it might be when I sit down at my desk as I'm about to start my work, I will gratitude 3 things I'm grateful for, and I have the journal beside me. So what you're doing is you're building a new routine onto something that you know is going to happen every day. So it lessens the degree of discipline and willpower. Effectively, what you're doing is you're stacking the odds, I suppose, in your favor and making it as easy as you can to do this. And when you push, there was some research on this done in, I think it was a university in the UK a number of years ago, and they looked at people who were trying to exercise. And I think one of the groups was they asked people just to record whether they exercise or not. Another group, they asked them to actually write down what they want to do in terms of exercising. And the third group, they asked them to be very specific, and they asked them to write what they call, I think it was called a habit intention statement, which was, you know, after I have my lunch, I will do 45 minutes of exercise. They were being very specific about it. And the range is 91% of those people actually carried out what they did because they were so specific about it. They were stacking it on top of an existing habit versus I think it was 20 to 40% for the others. So it's really about stacking the odds, you know, in your favor.
Yeah.
So I think the environment piece, the habit stacking piece is a simple thing. And I think it's also make it easy, make it as easy as possible. So if you're trying to implement a new habit, start small. You know, sometimes I've chatted to clients about considering what you might call a keystone habit. So what's one specific thing I could just focus on over the next little while to try and ingrain that. And a keystone habit just means that, you know, we mentioned sleep earlier. Somebody might want to start exercising a bit more frequently in the new year, but what they might have found towards the end of 2020, oh, my energy, I'm actually just very tired, and that's impacting the degree to which they might actually exercise. So a really simple thing might be, do you know what, if I get my sleep right, my energy is going to be better. If my energy is going to be better, I might be more likely to exercise, or I actually might eat a little bit better because I'm feeling a bit more energized and I'm less reaching for maybe comfort food. So a keystone habit is just one where if you make a bit of progress on it, it will then lead to other things. That makes sense.
Yeah, fantastic. And what about kind of the time frame for habits? I know there's different kind of research on this, but what's your take on how long does it take to embed an habit?
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's this whole 21 days to do this, 21 days to do that. From a research perspective, that's nonsense. So it doesn't take 21 days. The research has shown it's between 60 and 90 days.
Okay.
Depending on, there's variables there. So depending on the habit that you're trying to embed, and also depending on you, where you're at, your levels of motivation and connection with this, and a few other factors are obviously going to influence it. So if it's a relatively easier habit, you might be able to embed it quicker. But it's important to think as well that some habits are tied to deeper beliefs that we're carrying about ourselves. And those will take longer to happen and to embed. So again, just to use some simple examples, one habit that somebody might have might be, I'd love to have 45 minutes of a walk 3 days a week. Maybe before I might finish up work, I might get half an hour, 45 minutes of a walk in before I pick the kids up from school or creche.
Yeah.
That could be a very simple and very worthwhile thing that people might want to do. Now, a belief that could get in the way of that could be is somebody, work's gone on a little bit later. I just don't have the time. Before I know it, it's 5:30 and I've got to go pick up the kids or whatever. Whereas when you scratch the surface of that, it might not be work at all, but it might be a belief that I could be holding or anybody could be holding around, well, if I don't respond to these emails or if I'm not seen to be doing something at a certain time, it's going to reflect badly on me and my work, or that's what we're expected to do. Or that's the story, or that's the belief that I could be carrying around with me. You could go a little bit deeper and somebody might actually not necessarily, the belief they might have, again, this could be at a deep subconscious level, is that, well, I'm not actually worthy. I'm not valuing myself enough to make the time for me to do this. So I think it's important when you're looking at habits and behaviors that for some people, it can be a matter of some of the things that I've mentioned. A little bit of planning, I think, is hugely underrated when it comes to forming new habits. It could be just some transactional things, so higher level things. But for some, it could be a deeper issue that's really holding you back in terms
Yeah.
of implementing new behaviors.
Yeah. And then last question on this for today. What's your thought? What are your thoughts, seeing as we are into January 2021? What's your thoughts on New Year's resolutions today? Are they a good thing? Are they a bad thing? Or does it depend on the situation?
It's funny, like in some respects, if you think about like January, maybe having New Year's resolutions in January, it's as random and arbitrary as April or November when you think about it, because it's, you know, we've sort of said January is the start of the year, but if you look at different calendars, the Celtic calendar and others, like it doesn't necessarily need to be January. This is the first thing, I suppose, and I can understand the logic of why people might do it. You know, I think it's a good thing. Nothing really bad is necessarily going to come from anybody putting out a couple of New Year's resolutions. I think the reason why maybe some people aren't particularly successful with them is because I think not enough thought goes into the minutiae of making them happen. So coming back to one of the points we mentioned at the top of this around, okay, so if someone says, yeah, I'm going to start going to the gym, why? Why does that matter to you? Why is that relevant? I think sometimes we don't consider the why in this, and I think the why can obviously help with sort of intrinsic internal motivation. So I think that's one element. I think the other element is just not giving the time to think about, right, if I want to go to the gym or I want to get out for a walk, what's known as the sort of the activation energy, what's required to do that. So if you think of a link of a chain, there are little things that might be involved in me going to the gym. So one might be having my gear ready. So let's use a simple example. Let's say I want to walk in the mornings or run in the mornings. There might be a list of things that needs to happen, right? So I need to get to bed maybe a little bit earlier. Right? That means that maybe after dinner is done, I'm just getting my gear out and I'm leaving it there by the bed. You could go so far as sleeping in your running or walking gear if you wanted to. So when you wake up in the morning, you physically have to actually take the clothes off you and make a conscious decision. I'm not going versus doing it. So you might just break this up into, right, I need to get to bed earlier. I'm going to have my clothes out. I'm going to set my alarm. I'm going to tell my wife, my husband, my partner, I'm planning on doing this. So when the alarm goes off, if I don't get up, maybe I'll get a dig beside me and say, go on, get out. You might bring in an accountability buddy. So this could be a friend that you say, hey, let's, for the month of January, let's try and get our New Year's resolutions off together. So you bring a little bit of accountability and challenge and support. You might keep journals of various things that you're doing. But I think the biggest thing is the planning around this. And I've had lots of chats with people where when they're trying to implement new routines, new behaviors, new habits, but yet it doesn't get the same light of day as other things that happen. So meetings, work-related things that happen. Whereas if you're trying to introduce a new habit, and it might be taking a break every 90 minutes, but there's nothing gone into making this visible, whether it's in your calendar, whether it's a reminder visibly, a primer in front of you. So sometimes I think resolutions, they're great, but I think it's think about really what you're trying to accomplish and why it's important. I think B, think about your micro environment. And I think C, just think about the planning of it. It's not the most exciting thing in the world, but it does have impact in terms of actually doing it. Because I think discipline and willpower are overrated. Yes, you might need a bit of that at the start, but over time, you want to lessen your dependency on discipline and willpower, and stuff becomes habitual, if that makes sense.